God's people is much wider, broader, greater than just to be restricted or limited to one small segment of humanity. And God does not only care about the land of Israel, but God cares about other lands, even the land of the enemies, the Assyrians. What a great critique Jonah offers us. And the Old Testament ends with this critique. And yet many Christians today are stuck with those promises in Genesis that reflect a very narrow concept of God, primitive understanding of God, that even within the Old Testament was critiqued and was shattered by the end of the Old Testament period. And so when we come to the New Testament, we see also the unfolding of the inclusive concept of God, a theology where many things of the Old Testament began to be reinterpreted and redefined. Chosenness is reinterpreted in the New Testament. It is no more just one segment of people, but whoever believes have been made children of God, not because of the will of the flesh or the will of human beings, but because of God. It's a different interpretation of chosenness and election. Paul says about the promise of the land to Abraham, says, for the promise that Abraham would inherit the world. There is no mention in the Old Testament that Abraham was going to inherit the land. Yet Paul says that Abraham was promised to inherit the cosmos, the world, because Paul was reinterpreting the promise. Reinterpreting the promise in Jesus Christ. This is the movement in the Bible, from an exclusive tribal theology to a more inclusive and universal theology of God and God's love to all people and to all lands. And yet, I've been reading recently that some American Christians were saying the promises of the land still are valid for the Jewish people. Haven't they read the New Testament? Haven't they read even the development within the Old Testament? It's amazing. We read at the beginning of this session, we read from Isaiah 61, which Jesus quotes in the New Testament, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. If you read the Luke text, Jesus stops in mid-sentence. Luke, the way he records that part of the text, see Jesus stopping in mid-sentence. If you go back to chapter 61 of Isaiah, you will see that the rest of the chapter is very racist. Very racist. And Jesus would not read that section. Would not read it. Jesus would not read about the violence of God. Would not read about the wrath of God. He stopped in mid-sentence. There is a new theology. A theology that embraces people. Embraces God's love for all people. So, what I am saying is that Zionism has used these two tools to attract people, the Holocaust and the Bible. And I think we need to be aware of what has happened to our Bible, the way it has been hijacked by many of the Zionists. Let me move on. I would like to introduce you to a document that has been, in the last year, been launched, and it reflects the voice and the feeling of Palestinian Christians. And you have it in your packet. In your packet, you have the Kairos Palestine document. Please find it, because I hope that after the conference that you will take the time to introduce yourself to this very important document. This document attempts to challenge theology of exclusivity and exceptionalism. You know, one of the problems that we are trying to deal with here is that Israel has introduced the conflict many times as if it is Muslim-Jewish conflict. Because Israel is thinking about the West, thinking about you. And Israel knows that if the people in the West, at least so far because of the Islamophobia, if the people in the West see the conflict as being between Jews and Muslims, then most of the people in the West, the Christians, will obviously stand with the Jewish people because of the Holocaust, because they're their next door neighbors, because of all kinds of things. So Israel is trying to project the conflict as Jew versus Muslim. Well, what about the Christian Palestinians, the Christian Arabs? We also lost our land. We're also living under occupation. Most people don't know this. Many Christians in the West don't even know that Palestinian Christians exist. So this document is very, very important. Let me just very briefly introduce it to you, at least just to whet your appetite, and hopefully that you would take the time to study it. And now the Presbyterian Church is working on a study guide for this document, which I hope all of us would benefit from, whether we are Presbyterians or not. But let me say a few words about this document. The theology contained in this document is very simple and straightforward. We believe in one God, creator of the universe and humanity. We believe in a good and just God who loves each one of God's creatures. We believe that every human being is created in God's image and likeness, and that everyone's dignity is derived from the dignity of God. It's a very important, simple, but profound statement. The facts on the ground which the document presents are not exaggerated. Israeli settlements ravage our land in the name of God. Reality is the daily humiliation to which we are subjected at the military checkpoints. Reality is the separation between members of the same family. Religious liberty is severely restricted, and so on that you will find in the document. The Palestinian Christian community is saying in the document, loudly and clearly, that the occupation under which we live is a sin and an evil. These are strong words, but they are true. And that's exactly what's happening there. Any use of the Bible to legitimize or support injustice transforms religion into human ideology and strips the Word of God of its holiness, its universality, and truth. I don't know whether some of you are aware that just a few days ago, a very important conference ended in the Vatican, where the Synod of Middle East Catholic bishops were meeting for 2 weeks with the Pope in Rome. And they came up with a wonderful statement